Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today we're going to be taking a look at what I believe are the 10 best decks in Pokemon TCG Pocket right now. Now, normally we do tier lists, and that's sort of how we rank things from time to time. The metagame changes, but for the most part, I think that things have been shifting a lot, but also for the most part, kind of stayed the same, at least at the very top of the metagame. So in this video, I'm just going to go ahead and give what I believe are the 10 best decks in Pokemon TCG Pocket right now. There are a couple of decks that aren't going to be on this list that I think probably could have made this particular list, but I wanted to keep it an even number to 10 decks. So if there's anything that's not on this list, I do apologize. Comment below if there's something you think should be on this list that isn't. Keep it civil, but I would love to hear your opinions. But anyway, guys, let's get right into it. By the way, we're using a lot of data, statistics, and results from online tournaments to make this list, so it's kind of subjective, but also a little bit objective as well. Definitely using kind of real data and statistics to back this up, but it is my opinion at the end of the day. But let's get right into it. So again, this list is actually going to be in no particular order. We could order these decks, but I think for the most part, we kind of all understand what the metagame looks like, and if you haven't seen my meta report video yesterday, go check that out. But anyway, guys, no order to this list. Let's get right into it. We're going to try to move through this somewhat quickly. Number one, I say number one, but the first deck, and again, it's not in order, but the first deck here that we're going to talk about is going to be Weavile and Darkrai. I wanted to just talk about this right now quickly because this was the deck list that actually won the 1,500 player Ursa Days tournament this past weekend. So yes, I do think that Weavile is actually a really good card right now. Just because it won the tournament, I don't think that it's like the best deck in the game or anything, but I do think that this is a deck list that actually has been around for a while. It came out in Spacetime Smackdown. It saw a little bit of success, but for the most part, last format that was heavily dominated by grass-type cards, it kind of made this deck, you know, not the most well-positioned deck in the metagame. Things like Exeggutor definitely did really well against it, and Exeggutor was very popular last format with Celebi, things like that, but now the format has shifted quite a bit. At the very, very top of the metagame, we have Dialga and Arceus, and then we have some of those fighting decks that counter Dialga and Arceus, and then we have the water decks. So all of those are probably going to be on this list. Just a spoiler warning. But for the most part, I think that this deck is actually really well positioned. Arceus has changed the game a lot. Basically, the format right now is very tempo focused. Most decks are kind of focused around the mid to late game. Dialga and Arceus is a little bit slower than maybe we want it to be, but it's very consistent in getting to that mid game where, of course, it does very good damage with Arceus 130 damage. So the upside to a deck like this, which is, of course, doing less damage, we are able to do that damage earlier in the game. This is one of the top aggressive, fast-paced decks in the game, and I think, honestly, if you're playing Pokemon Pocket, not even in a tournament setting, but when ranked battles come out, or even if you're grinding matches for emblem events or things like that, playing decks that are a little bit more faster pace, honestly, in my mind, in my opinion, I should say, are a bit more fun to play. So I think that Weavile and Darkrai is a really, really strong combination. We're not playing Dawn in this list. When this list came out and this archetype came out in Spacetime Smackdown, I was playing Dawn because I thought that was a really strong combination. But I think for the most part, all of the top decks right now are just really leaning into going second, and you're just going to hope that you do go second. That way you can get that energy first and then attack first. And that's really what this deck right now is all about. Focused around maximum consistency, 2 copies of Leaf, 1 copy of Mars, 2 Giant Cape, 1 potion. One thing to note is that somebody did mention that the player that won the tournament did mention that they would have probably changed potion for maybe another Sabrina or maybe another Pokemon Communications or anything other than potion. They thought it wasn't as useful. So that is the one thing. We did mention that in yesterday's video. But yes, potion can be swapped out. And the other thing too, I should have said this previously, but the specific lists, like the 20 card lists that we're showcasing in this video, can be changed around a little bit. So don't, you know, spend too much time focusing around the exact 20 cards. You know, mix them around a little bit, change them how you think they should be changed. But for the most part, we're talking about kind of the archetypes themselves, like the core package of this deck, which of course is Weavile and Darkrai. And I think that Weavile and Darkrai is a top 10 combination, which is why I definitely wanted to put it on this list, but I didn't want to spend too much time talking about it because we did reference it in yesterday's video because, again, it did win the tournament. Okay, so the number 2 deck, which is the other dark type deck. Yes, there are actually 2 dark type decks in this video, is going to be dark type Arceus. And this is very similar, but again, we're utilizing that dark type archetype and we're using it more as a mid to late game deck with Arceus and things like Crobat. This is a deck that's very different actually in how it plays than Weavile and Darkrai, much less fast paced, but a lot more I guess, dominant in that mid to late game. 130 with Arceus, plus the 20 with Nightmare Aura, plus the 30 damage from Crobat. It's a lot of damage in the late game. This deck just takes a little bit more time to get get set up and get rolling. So the matchups are going to be a little bit more volatile. This list has been performing well since the beginning of this format. It's floating around 52%. I think it should probably see a little bit more play, but the thing with Arceus is that it's seeing play in so many different deck lists. So as far as Arceus decks go, and there's quite a few, and there's going to be quite a few on this list, I don't think that this is necessarily the best way to play Arceus, but if you're looking for a deck that's purely extremely strong in that late game, this is the deck for you, doing so much damage between, like I said, Nightmare Aura with Darkrai EX, with the Cunning Link damage from Crobat, and then of course just the attack from Ultimate Force with Arceus. This is a deck that just packs a punch, but can struggle in the early game. However, it's not really that much of a problem right now because even the fighting decks aren't necessarily super aggressive. Most decks in the format right now are a little bit more focused around the mid to late game. So a deck like this actually fits in fairly well. So if you wanted to play a dark type deck that was honestly kind of the opposite of Weavile Darkrai, this is going to be a great deck for you. One thing you'll notice is that a lot of people are playing one copy of Mars in all of these deck lists, and I actually do think that it's somewhat correct. I think Mars is a great card in a variety of different reasons. Somebody did mention in the comments, I always forget your guys' names, so I apologize, but I do try to reference your points that you make in the comment section. Somebody did mention that Mars is actually really good against some of those 18 and 16 trainer decks, which have hands that tend to pile up really quickly because they're playing less Pokemon. So I do really like Mars for a variety of reasons. I think that one copy of Mars is kind of correct in so many different decks in the format right now. And this deck is really no different. A lot of Pokemon on this list, so not as much room for other trainer cards. So that's sort of the one downside to this deck. But yes, very strong in the late game. Number 3 is going to be Gallade. And Gallade is a very interesting one. I think a lot of people either love Gallade and they're super excited to see it doing well, or they just don't really care about Gallade. I actually think that Gallade is as well positioned as basically any other card in the entire game right now, based around a couple of different factors. I think that fighting in general is really good. Gallade kind of is one of those two cards that counters Arceus really well. So I think Gallade is really strong against some of the top decks of the format. It's both Gallade and Rampardos. Where Gallade really shines right now, in my opinion, is that it actually, well, I shouldn't say Gallade, but this Gallade deck focused with Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee is very good against Gyarados. And in this past week or two, Gyarados has really risen again as kind of a top 5 most played deck. A lot of people are playing Gallade with that Manaphy Origin Form Palkia combination. In my mind, it really is one of the top decks in this current format, and Gallade is very well positioned for it. So if we're going to continue to see a lot of Gyarados and a lot of those water type decks, I do think that Gallade is actually a really strong choice here. I think that Hitmonlee Mars Shadow combo is just honestly a really well positioned card and combination in the format right now. One copy of Mars yet again, and then we have Rocky Helmet with Hitmonlee. I think it's just a really nice, strong deck here. I do think that it kind of can feel a little bit awkward in the early game, of course. We have, 5 different basic Pokemon we can start with, and 2 of them are kind of useless in the early game. So we're really reliant on leading off with that Hitmonlee, and we don't have really any way to retreat out. So if you don't lead off with Hitmonlee, you might be missing out on a turn or 2. Yes, we can teleport out with Ralts, but we still have to attach an energy anyway. So technically speaking, leading off with Ralts isn't terrible because we can save that energy and get out of the active spot, but we still have to find that Hitmonlee. If we don't find Hitmonlee, the deck can kind of flow a little bit awkwardly, but for the most part, I do think that this is still one of the top 10 decks in Pokemon Pocket right now, and I think it's actually very well positioned, so shout out to Gallade. Next up is going to be that Gyarados deck, like we were talking about. I think that Gyarados is still a really strong card. I think for a while, people didn't necessarily know how to play Gyarados or what the best way to play Gyarados was. And that's, of course, me included. Now, once we got, I guess, sort of a glimpse of this Origin Form Palkia Manaphy combination, originally being played with Palkia EX, I think a lot of people's, brains sort of, the gears started to turn and they were like, wait a minute, why don't we just play Gyarados in this exact, package and in this exact archetype? And yeah, turns out to pair very well. I think that Gyarados is, in general, just a really strong card. 140 damage is 140 damage. Yes, a lot of Pokemon are, wearing giant capes, so they have more HP than 140, but for the most part, we have 180. So we really are just sort of utilizing Gyarados as sort of that late game sweeper Pokemon. Hopefully, boosting up our Pokemon with Manaphy and then going into Origin Form Palkia, attacking until we get KO'd, and then going into our Gyarados. The same strategy as if we were playing Palkia EX. The only downside to this deck, although I do think it's better than the same deck but playing Palkia, the only only downside is those Magikarps, which again get absolutely auto-destroyed by Hitmonlee. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The other thing with Manaphy without Giant Cape is that there are a lot of those aggro Pokemon that do 50 damage for 1 energy, things like Skarmory, like Sudowoodo, like Carnivine. So without Giant Cape, Manaphy can feel a little bit squishy. 50 HP is a little bit awkward, but for the most part, I do think that Gyarados is still one of the top 10 cards and one of the top 10 archetypes in the format right now. And similarly, we are going to also see a very similar list to this, but we're playing Palkia. I think that's okay. So it's not the next one. Okay. All good. There's going to be quite a few different water type decks in this video, but for right now, this is Gyarados. Now, again, we are playing Giovanni, so we can go up to 150, but the cool thing about this deck is that we're really able to utilize Irida. So 120 HP on Origin Form Palkia is a lot. There's not a lot of Pokemon that are able to KO us, and then Gyarados has 180. So the combination of the high HP from Gyarados and then Irida and Rocky Helmet really does kind of do enough. Rocky Helmet fixes that kind of math problem doing 140. If we hit somebody for 140, they're going to go down to a low amount of HP, and then if they have to attack us, then they're oftentimes in range of just getting KO'd from that Rocky Helmet damage. So a really nice combination here. Yes, I do think that Palkia EX very similarly is almost just as good as Gyarados, but maybe not as good in some matchups. We'll have to kind of look at that data and determine which decks are better in which scenarios, but for the most part, I think that Gyarados definitely is a top contender in the format right now. And next up is going to be Starmie with Palkia. So I believe I have 3 or 4 different water type decks in this video, and the reason for that is I think that water in general has more support than any other type in the game right now. We still have Misty, we have Giant Cape to boost the HP of these water Pokemon, and we have Irida to heal them up. So a lot of great support for these water type Pokemon. Starmie is a card that I think is still probably more disrespected than most other Pokemon in the entire game right now. If you look at the win rates and you look at the success of really all of these Starmie decks, they perform extremely, extremely well. Some of the highest win rates out of any of the decks and any of the cards in Pokemon Pocket right now in this current metagame. So I think Starmie should see a lot more play. It just isn't really seeing that much play. I do think that it is a top 10 deck, which is why we're covering it in this video. Starmie's good for a variety of different reasons. 2 energy, 90 damage with Misty's means we can set this thing up in like 1 turn, which is definitely really, really cool. We have to evolve for sure, but we have Palkia as a leadoff option. And for the most part, 130 is not a great amount of HP, but with Giant Cape, that should put us out of range of getting KO'd by an Arceus. We also have Irida and Potion to keep our Pokemon alive for much longer, but we also have Free Retreat, which is super, super nice in this particular format as well, going into Palkia into the late game. Just a maximum consistency deck. I think Starmie is super consistent. 90 damage is a really good number. 2-hit KO is basically everything in the format, other than maybe something like a Gyarados, of course, with Irida and Potions and things like that. But for the most part, 180 and 2 attacks is enough to take the KO on most Pokemon in the entire game right now. Super consistent. Free Retreat is always really good. There's not a lot of relevant Pokemon in the game right now that have Free Retreat. So for the most part, I think that Starmie benefits greatly from that. And of course, we have Giant Cape, we have Misty, we have Irida. We have all of the stuff that makes this deck very, very good. It makes really all of these water type decks really good. So this deck is playing only 5 Pokemon, so it is a 15 trainer deck. Most of these water decks probably are going to be playing a lot of trainers. That's just sort of the best way to play water right now. But for this deck, I actually think that it is really, really good. I think it gets carried by the whole Misty Irida combination thing, but Starmie in general is just a good Pokemon, and I think it deserves a lot more respect, honestly, especially when you look at its win rates over the last like 4 weeks. I think it's just been really, really, really consistent. But next up, let's go and take a look. I think what is this, our 5th deck, which is going to be Turbo Arceus. And this is a deck that I actually made a video on recently. This is a list that I think is really, really fun, and it's really interesting. At first glance, it can seem a little bit awkward. We have a lot of different Pokemon in this deck, but they really are all aggressively focused cards. Carnivine is able to do 50 damage from the get-go for 1 energy. We are playing grass energies in this deck. We also have Rotom, which can do 50 damage if our opponent's Pokemon has a tool card attached. That oftentimes is the case, so very consistent 50 damage early game attacker. We have Rotom as well, which acts as a free pivot if Arceus is down here, and then we also have Sky Support Shaman, which allows us to retreat out for free for a lot of our different Pokemon. We are playing Dawn as well to be a little bit more explosive, to potentially go into that Arceus a turn earlier. We have Giovanni to do that extra damage. We have the Rocky Helmets. We have room for a lot of great trainer cards in this deck. 1 copies of most of this, 1 Giovanni, 1 Cyrus, 1 Dawn, 1 Leaf, 1 Sabrina. 1 Pokemon Communications as well. So this is a deck that really is kind of middling in terms of what it wants to do. You have a lot of really strong Pokemon in the early game, and then you have Arceus in the late game, which can do a lot of damage. Technically speaking, 50 damage from like a Carnivine or a Rotom plus 130 from Arceus should be enough to KO basically everything in the game, and that's really what this deck comes down to. It just can feel a little bit awkward in its leadoffs. Sometimes if you're leading off with Shaman or you're leading off with Arceus, it can kind of feel not great for the most part, but I think that this is still a really, really strong deck, and I think that aggressive decks are actually pretty well positioned in the metagame right now, and I think there's really only a few of them. This is, I think, definitely one of the top 3 or even top 2, aggro decks in Pokemon Pocket right now. It had to be included, honestly. I mean, its results are pretty substantial. It did actually, I think, just get like top 8 at the Ursa Days tournament, and it's placed well in previous tournaments all over the place. It's actually won a couple of smaller tournaments as well. So it's a deck that I think is also a little bit disrespected, but its results are just the truth, and it's doing pretty well. It's a deck that I actually play oftentimes myself because, like I said, I like to play those more fast-paced aggressive decks, and I think this fits the bill really, really well. It really is kind of the only true aggressive Arceus deck that, Carnivine is sort of that aggro combo card to go with Arceus, and I think it's a really good card in general. But for the most part, I would just say that this is a very, very solid deck list. I think it definitely belongs like in the top 10, which is why I wanted to put it in this video. And there's a lot of different ways in which we can kind of pair Arceus with Carnivine and make sort of these turbo aggressive decks. We'll see that there is actually just a pure grass Arceus deck that is also on this list with Exeggutor. That actually might be next up. Yeah, I think it is. But like I said, this is the list that did the best recently in an online tournament. And I actually really liked this Assault Laser Rotom inclusion, right? When we're playing grass type energies, we're kind of limited for our choices of aggressive Pokemon, because we can't, of course, play Skarmory or Sudowoodo because we're playing grass energy. So for that reason, we have to play something like a Rotom, which of course is maybe a little bit less consistent than Carnivine, but it is able to do that early game damage, which is pretty significant. And then the dash attack from the Speed Link Rotom is also really, really good. So I love Turbo Arceus. I think that it's a lot better than people give it credit for. It consistently places well in tournaments, and it also has about a 52% win rate over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So I really, really like this list as well. Next up, we have Exeggutor and Arceus. This is really just kind of a grass type deck. It's kind of funny that the best way to play grass right now is really this deck, or really the last 2 decks. I don't know if I would consider that first Turbo Arceus deck a true grass type deck. It is playing grass energies, but this is really, I would say, the only true grass type deck that's at the top of the metagame. Really one of the top 10 decks, or top 5 decks, I would say, in terms of win rates of the last few weeks. I think Exeggutor is still a really relevant card. It basically slots into this deck very, very similarly to how many other cards slot into the Turbo Arceus deck. 1 energy in this thing's attack cost, and it does 40 to 80 damage, ton of HP. We can play Ericas, we can play Giant Cape. It's absolutely a monster. I think that Exeggutor is still a very overtuned card. For the most part, we just don't necessarily have a lot of great partners to pair with Exeggutor because, again, Arceus is kind of gatekeeping the format right now. A big reason why Celebi isn't necessarily super relevant is because it just gets one-hit KO'd by things like Arceus. So for that reason, Exeggutor has to be paired with Arceus because Arceus is just kind of the best card in the game right now. So yes, we are still playing Carnivine, which again kind of fits the bill. The cool thing about this deck is that it's strong going first and second. Very few Pokemon in the game right now like to go first. Exeggutor is really kind of the #1 example of cards that like to go first because we're able to attack and evolve before our opponent. Definitely really good. There's not that many Stage 1 Pokemon that are powerful with 1 energy in their attack cost. Exeggutor is really the only example of that. For example, like Weavile, which again is a top deck in this format. Weavile is a Stage 1 Pokemon with 1 energy in its attack cost, but it can't actually do significant damage until we're able to already get damage on our opponent. So Weavile is a Stage 1 Pokemon with 1 energy in its attack cost, but Weavile actually, I think, would rather go second so you can attack with Sneasel first. Exeggutor is doing potentially 80 damage on our second turn going first and has 160 HP. Really, really strong. I mean, Exeggutor is just a really strong card, and it actually pairs pretty decently with Arceus. It's just funny to me that the best way to play Exeggutor is to pair it with Arceus right now because we need that damage potential in the late game, and Arceus is really the best card to do that. We don't have any way to like accelerate energies to Arceus, but at least we have something that's really, really powerful that we don't have to invest a lot of energies too early in the game. And then again, like I said, we also have Carnivine, which is really strong going second because we can just attack with that Vine Whip from our first turn going second for 50 damage, which is, again, pretty substantial. This deck is playing 2 copies of Leaf to get that Arceus out of the active spot if we do lead with it, 2 copies of Ericas to kind of keep that Exeggutor alive for longer, and I think you're kind of forced into playing Giant Cape Ericas when you're playing Exeggutor right now because there's so much Dialga and Arceus, so we kind of have to be able to live a couple of Metallic Turbo attacks and then an Ultimate Force, which can kind of combine for up to like 160 or what is it, like 190 damage. So really the only way we can live those combinations of attacks is from things like Exeggutor with 160 HP and then Giant Cape and Erika's, right? So that's really what it's kind of all about. We're kind of hoping to live longer, or live long enough to potentially KO that Dialga before it KOs us. That way it becomes just sort of an Arceus battle at the end of the day, which hopefully we should win if we're the first person attacking. That's really what it comes down to, but I really like this grass type Exeggutor deck. I love Exeggutor, and it's still really, really good. Okay, the last water deck in this video is going to be Articuno, and Articuno 18 Trainer is still, I think, a top deck in the format. In fact, I really think it's actually probably a top 5 deck in this current format. It's always a little bit disappointing to see that playing decks with 18 trainers and 2 Pokemon is a viable strategy, but you know what? Water type has gotten so much support. In fact, you could actually, I guess, make the point or the argument that 18 Trainer Palkia is also a top 10 deck in the format, but I wanted to include the other Palkia deck before I included Articuno EX. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't include like the Origin Form Palkia deck in this video, which I thought was kind of funny. The reason why I didn't include it in this video was because we already had Palkia with Starmie, and I think that Palkia is actually falling out of favor pretty considerably for things like Gyarados. Yeah, so okay, so I kind of maybe dropped the ball and forgot to put 18 Trainer Palkia in this video, or not 18 Trainer Palkia, but Origin Form Palkia. But you know what? At least we threw Palkia in this video to some degree, so keep that in mind. I probably did forget to include just like the pure Palkia deck on this video. I do think that Palkia is one of the strongest decks in the format, no matter how you're playing it. So keep that in mind. I did forget to put it in, so I do apologize. But either way, it probably would be here if we were going to be doing 11 decks. But anyway, Articuno EX 18 Trainer, still one of the top decks in the entire game right now. In fact, I think if we're playing 18 Trainer, I think that Articuno is actually the best way to play 18 Trainer. So yes, we can play 18 Trainer Palkia, but I would say that Articuno is kind of better in that particular archetype. And if we did want to play Palkia, we should be playing it with the Origin Form or with Starmie. I think those are actually the 2 better ways to play Palkia. But what's actually interesting is I think if we're playing Origin Form Palkia, we would probably rather play Gyarados, which means the best way to play Palkia is actually, I think, with Starmie right now, or in a Articuno Palkia sort of 16 trainer combo deck. But for the most part, I did want to include Articuno because it is realistically really, really strong. It consistently plays as well. It got top 4, I think, at the recent Ursa Days tournament. It's got one of the highest win rates out of any of the decks in this entire format so far. I think that it is really strong, and it's a much more consistent than it really should be, I think. Just Misty, Blizzard, Irida, Giant Cape, Rocky Helmet. It's got everything going for it. Too much healing, too much HP with Giant Cape for the amount of damage and potential early game damage that we're able to do with Misty, right? I mean, I think that turn 1 Misty on a basic Pokemon like Articuno is always going to be absolutely insane. I think everybody that plays Pokemon Pocket has experienced a turn 1 Blizzard before, and it's not fun. It's not engaging. Excuse me, and it's honestly one of the worst things that can happen when you're playing Pokemon Pocket, but from a competitive standpoint, it is a big reason why Articuno is still one of the top decks in this entire format right now. I think that 18 Trainer Articuno has been around for a long time. It just seems to be getting better and better. Like I said, we always had Misty, but now we have Cyrus, which works really, really well with Blizzard. We're basically targeting all of our opponent's bench Pokemon to bring them up, whichever one we want. With Cyrus, now we can increase the HP with Articuno. With Giant Cape, we can do extra damage with Rocky Helmet, and we can heal with Irida and Potion. Just an absolutely disgusting combination of cards that work extremely well, much better than they really ever should. So 18 Trainer Articuno, it has to go on the list. It really does. I know it's kind of disappointing, but sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's fun. Like when we get ranked mode, we're gonna see so many of these Misty decks. Like I think 18 Trainer Articuno might be like the most common deck in ranked mode, which is going to be kind of interesting for sure, but you know, we'll have to see. The other cool thing about Articuno, I guess, is that it actually is, again, one of those few decks that actually sometimes likes to go first, because you can play Misty on turn 1 going first, which means that technically speaking, we can Blizzard on our first turn, and that's really kind of you know, I mean, even if, honestly, if we're going second, the cool thing is that even if you get 1 energy with Misty, we can Ice Wing on our first turn, which is just crazy. So it's a lot more consistent in the early game than it probably should be. I know a lot of people get aggravating, or get a little bit angry, I should say, with Misty, because it seems to never flip heads, at least when I play it. But again, in a tournament setting, people get lucky sometimes and they just flip heads all day with Misties, and that's why Articuno is still a very competitive deck and still one of the best decks in the format. Okay, so lastly, not lastly, but we have 2 more left. It's going to be Rampardos and Lucario, and then of course at the end we have Dialga and Arceus. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these particular deck lists because I think we all understand that these are kind of the two decks at the top of the metagame. This is the number 1 and the number 2 most played deck of the format so far by a pretty wide margin. I would say that Dialga and Arceus is definitely like the top deck of this metagame in terms of its overall results, how many people are playing it, and how well it's doing, but actually it's kind of on a downward trend. We noticed that in our meta report video yesterday, and I think a big reason for that is because it has such a hard counter, which is Rampardos and Lucario with Sudowoodo, with Marshadow. This is a very, very good deck. I don't know if I would really ever put it in the top 3 if it didn't have such a great matchup against Arceus and Dialga. Does that make sense? Like, I think its overall strength isn't as good as some of the other decks that we would put below it on like a tier list, but because it has such a good matchup and really the best matchup against Dialga and Arceus, which is the number 1 most played deck, we have to give a lot of respect to Rampardos. And it is a good deck in general. I think that we're kind of a little bit limited in how we're able to play fighting decks right now. I think that fighting is a really interesting archetype and we have a lot of really good fighting cards, but if you're playing a fighting deck and you don't have an inherently really good matchup against Arceus, then there really isn't any reason to be playing those fighting type cards. So for that reason, we're kind of bottled into playing really only 2 core archetypes, which is Rampardos and Gallade. And then of course we have ancillary pieces like Lucario, like Sudowoodo, like Marshadow, like Hitmonlee, and you can kind of mix and match a little bit, but I think for the most part, people have really recognized what the best way to play both of these archetypes is, and the deck is really, really good. It does what it needs to do. I think Rampardos is just kind of a crazy card in its own right. 1 energy on a stage 2 Pokemon doing 130. With Lucario, that goes up to 150, 170. It's just crazy that you can do so much damage with a Pokemon for only 1 energy in its attack cost. And yes, Head Smash does do damage to Rampardos, but oftentimes that doesn't really matter. Giant Cape can increase us to 170 HP. But for the most part, we're kind of using Rampardos to finish games, right? We lead off with Sudowoodo, we go into our Marshadow, and then we kind of take our first and 2 KOs, hopefully, and then in the late game, we can kind of carry through with Rampardos. But oftentimes, in the format right now, if we're able to KO that Dialga and then KO that Arceus or something, there's not a lot of rebounding that affects, or that decks have. Really, once their kind of core attacker goes down, they're really just, they kind of lose the game. So that's kind of how Pokemon Pocket matches go. And then Rampardos, as sort of that late game wall, is able to KO a lot of Pokemon, especially if you get your Lucario set up, which just means that once you take that 1 KO with Rampardos, the game is kind of just over for the most part at that point. But yeah, I think everybody understands what this deck list does and how good it is, and I do think that it's pretty strong. Yeah, particularly, I would say that it's a top 10 deck because of the number 1 deck. If we were going to be ranking these decks in order, it would be Dialga and Arceus. Now, I think that the way that people have played this list has evolved a little bit. We see more copies of Giovanni now. We're definitely kind of focused around playing the Flagrant Flower Garden Shaman with Mew EX. I think that those are kind of the 2 best like secondary Pokemon that you pair with Arceus and Dialga. At least that's sort of agreed upon by most players right now. Most people are playing 2 copies of Leaf and not playing the Sky Support Shaman. You can kind of do either or, but I think most people have recognized that that is the best combination here. And yeah, this is just sort of the deck that I think most people have defaulted to this format. I think that no matter what, every format's going to have sort of their golden child of cards. This is a deck that I think a lot of people were waiting to play and were waiting to be relevant. Dialga was always a decent card. We just didn't have a great partner for it. Arceus came out and everyone was like, oh, Arceus is crazy. Well, actually, originally people were like, Arceus isn't good, but then it ended up being crazy and it paired very perfectly with Dialga. And I know a lot of people love Dialga and they always wanted to play it. So this is really kind of the number 1 deck of this format that I know that people just really are kind of defaulting to. And you know what? You can't really blame them for the most part. It is probably the most consistently best deck I think in the game right now. Like if Rampardos and Gallade hadn't risen to be sort of like other top 5 most played decks, this deck here would have really just kind of run away with the entire format. It's consistent enough. It's filled with Pokemon with a lot of HP, basic Pokemon, a very consistent strategy. Metallic Turbo sets things up just all the time. It's not like Moltres, like you're guaranteed to get those energies. Arceus is doing that damage by turn 3, turn 4 at the very minimum, and you're gonna have to just deal with it. The deck does what it does every game. We have Mew EX, which can kind of auto win some matchups as well. The deck just kind of has a lot going for it. I think the only reason why this list isn't like the only downside to this deck is that it's basically just like a turn slower than you would want it to be. And it's also very reliant on going second, which isn't really a bad thing because most decks in the Pokemon Pocket are reliant on going second, but it does get significantly worse when we go first. So it is kind of an RNG aspect. I think that's really the only downside to Dialga and Arceus in this particular format. And this format overall is that, again, we just don't have a lot of great decks that I would say do very well going first. So a lot of times amongst the top decks of the format, it really is just about who goes second or not. And from a competitive standing in Pokemon Pocket, there's no way to guarantee that you're going to go first or second, right? I mean, it's the same, like, even if we were able to choose who goes first and second, it would alternate in like a best of 3 match, right? So it doesn't really matter, but I would say that for the most part, going second is much better than going first, especially for a lot of these top decks of the format. So it can feel a little bit rough, especially from a competitive standpoint, when really all of the top decks exceedingly really want to go second, because when they do go second, it's very hard to beat them. So it can kind of feel a little bit annoying at times, but for the most part, you know, I would love to see sort of the win rate data on some of these decks going first compared to going second. I think it could be pretty staggering. I don't know. Maybe it's not actually that significant. Maybe it is. I don't know. But anyway, this, in my mind, I left it for last because it is the quintessential deck. I think most people have seen it. We've talked about it week after week. And this was the list, I think, that got second place or third place at the Ursa Days tournament this weekend. So I wanted to include it. And that's the other thing. All of these decks here are not decks that I built myself. These are lists that have performed well in online competition. So again, you know, feel free to change around the lists in their specific cards, but for the most part, we're talking about kind of the strategies themselves, the core of these decks and the archetypes themselves, and that's why, you know, they are the way they are, and why I think you could probably change around some cards. But anyway, that's the video. Those are, in my mind, the 10 best decks in Pokemon TCG Pocket. Comment below, did I miss anything? I know I mentioned that I forgot to include, like, Palkia on this list, but it is what it is. Like I said, I think Palkia is kind of falling out of favor for the most part. Play Starmie if you're playing Palkia, and if you're playing Origin Form Palkia, play Gyarados. That's my opinion. And if you're playing 18 Trainer, play Articuno. Palkia is just in a really weird spot. I think people really always try to make Palkia its own archetype, but I think it really does do best as sort of an ancillary Pokemon in other archetypes. So yeah, anyway guys, that's the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, no tier list this week. I just wanted to throw everything out here and just do like a top 10 decks video to kind of just consolidate all of that and, you know, make it easier to kind of digest. Yeah, again, comment below what you guys think. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Have a good one. And yeah, bye.